Welcome to this week's video. Today, I'd like to talk to you about a project that I did to help me build better habits. I've been trying to build more habits over time, and one tricky way that I found to do this that really helped me was to count my streaks. That is how many consecutive days I've been doing a certain activity. And that is crazy powerful because when you look at those numbers on your app, whatever tool you're using, you see there that you've been doing a certain thing for 10 days. You're just most likely gonna keep doing that thing. It's a very effective way for you to build a habit. And everything was fine. I downloaded an app on the App Store on my phone here. And at first it was perfect, right? I was using this app. I had, I think, 5 streaks. I wanted to, for example, add reading more books, stretching every day, working out at the gym, and so on. But I had a problem, and that is that when I tried to put more and more activities, eventually the app started charging me. He wanted me to pay a subscription fee if I wanted to keep adding more activities. And so to solve that problem, I just decided to make my own app, a way that I could track my own streaks myself without having to pay a subscription fee to anybody else. And so in this video here, I'm going to be showing you my solution, and hopefully that's going to be useful for you if you want to be learning a bit more about web development, about app development, and maybe, who knows, maybe you want to build this app for yourself. So let's jump in right into and see how I build this app over here. All right, so let me switch now here to my app, just so you can see the final result of what I built. And it's a pretty simple app. You know, we have only one page here. Right now, I'm just running this page on my local network over here. And you simply have this page here, and you can pretty much add new activities. So let's say you want to start, I don't know, you want to start learning how to cook every single day, right? So you can put, I want to learn how to cook. And then you're just going to submit this. And this app is just going to save a new activity for you. So you can see here, we have a new activity, and the current streak for that activity is 0 days. And you can see on the left of every single activity, you have a checkbox. And that checkbox means whether you've done that activity today or not. In my example here, I solved one lead code problem today, which means that my current streak is at 1 day. Let's say I did not do that, right? If I hadn't done this and I click on submit, you see all of my streaks go back to 0. And the idea here is that you can log in this website every single day and just check the things that you've done. And over time, you know, this streak here is going to build up, and it's going to be easier for you to follow your habits because you see how many consecutive days you've been doing that certain thing, and you don't want to lose that streak. So for example, today, let's say I did all my activities. I just check all of them. I click on submit, and you see all of them are going to go now to 1 day, meaning that my current streak is at 1 day. If I do the same thing tomorrow, this is going to go to 2 days and so on. So let's see how I program this here. I use Python for everything and HTML, of course, for this page. But let's see here how it all works. So let me open now my VS Code here. I have my VS Code open. You see on the terminal here, I'm running my application. So I can just close that for now. And now let's just look here at my Explorer. So all the files that I built, so we can take a look on how I built everything. I pretty much just created a folder called Streak Tracker. And I have here a few files, readme and .ignore, but that's not important. But I have a source file that contains all of my source code. And right over here, I split my project into a few folders. First of all, I have a folder called data that's going to be managing all of the database related stuff, how we can save data to a database, how we can retrieve data from there. We have a interfaces folder that's just going to make a bit cleaner our organization of our code, so that we can just have a interface that our classes can interact with. So they don't necessarily need to know exactly a certain object that exists. They can simply know the interface. And as long as we're given an object that is of that certain interface, it's gonna accept it fine. So just a way for us to organize things better. So we decouple a little bit our code. So let's say we want to build a database using SQLite, for example, and another database that uses MongoDB, for example. We can simply have those things, the implementation of the databases into a certain object and certain class that they themselves implement, but our main application only cares about the interface, how we can interact with those databases. How exactly it all works, it doesn't really matter, right? So that's why we have this interface, just to decouple a bit our classes. And we have here a folder called REST server that's going to hold all of our web server related files, how we are actually hosting this website, so we can accept post requests and get requests, so we can actually include data in our database, and how we can then send data to our client on the website. And here we have a main.py file that's just gonna instantiate all of our classes, put everything together, and actually run the application. So let's start with that one. Let me open here the main.py file. You see it's a very short file. And here we can see we simply import a few files that's in our project already. So for example, here we're gonna import our database manager, which is under here our data folder. We're also gonna import our Flask server. We're using Flask as a web framework to host this website. And we're actually just using the development server from Flask just because it's a local application that I use for myself. But pretty much we're just importing a few classes from these folders. Here we're gonna instantiate our database manager. We're gonna instantiate our Flask server. And we're just gonna simply call the run method of our Flask server, giving the host that you wanna serve it on. So here 000 means we can access the server within our local network, right? And even outside. And now that's the main.py file. Let's see exactly how every single one of those classes work. So here, I think the most important for us to see is how we can interact with a database, right? And as I mentioned before, for this project, I chose to use SQLite 3. That is a database that's very easy to use. You have one file in your repository here. I have this strict_tracker.db. That's a file that's holding all of my data, all the data from my project, all those streaks, the activities, and so on. And SQLite 3, we just need a way to interact with this database, how we can read data, how we can add data to that. And that is done here by my database manager. And you can see here that we have this class called database manager, and it implements a certain interface. And that's what I was telling you about before in my interface folder, that this class here is subclassing this other class, which just defines an interface for things to interact with. So let's go ahead and open this interface here. It's called database manager. And you see that's database manager interface. That's what our SQLite 3 database is implementing. And as far as our other components are concerned, they don't really care, how our database does its own internal things, how it's implemented. It only cares about this interface here, about the methods that it can call to achieve certain things. And for our Flask server, all it needs to know from the database is these three things over here. The Flask server, our application, it only needs to be able to add a new streak, right? So if the user inputs a new streak that he wants to track, our server needs to be able to add a new streak to our database. So it's going to be given the activity name, that's a string, and a done flag, whether the person did or not that activity. And that's all it needs to know, right? Also needs to know it needs a method to delete a certain activity. So given a certain activity, we need to be able to delete that from our database. And finally here, that's the most important method, is that we want to get the current status of all of our activities and the current streak, the most recent streak. So let's say, for example, we've been swimming every single day for 1 month. Then I want to be able to retrieve the fact that I have 30 days streak for the swimming activity. And that's what this method here does. It's going to be returning a dictionary for you. And you can read over here that the keys of this dictionary are the activity names. And each activity name is going to have another dictionary as a value. And this dictionary as the value is going to then have two other keys, whether it was done today and the most recent streak. In my swimming example, that would be the 30 days that the person had been doing that. And the cool thing about this method of doing things is that by using an interface over here, whichever client is using this database, he doesn't really need to know how it's implemented. All you need to know is which methods can I call, which methods can I be using from a certain object. It doesn't matter how they do it. All it matters is that the method is there and that I can use it. So that's why I'm not going to be going over here the implementation details of the database manager. These things here, it's very specific to SQLite 3, how I can get data from the database, how I can put data in the database. If I was using another database, the implementation will be completely different, but as long as it implements those interface methods, then my client can use it just as nicely, right? And just one quick note here is that on my database class, you can see here I put all of those three public methods at first, right? So add streak, that was part of our interface. Delete activity, that was also in our interface. And here get activity streaks also in our interface. All those other methods, you're gonna see they have a underscore in the beginning of the method, and that's convention for saying that a method is private, which means it's only needed for the internal implementation of this class over here. The things that are shown outside, right, they don't have the underscore, they're public methods. If you're using Java, those languages in Python, you know, these things are not as, let's say, enforced, but it's just a convention here that the public methods don't have the underscore in the beginning. But as far as our application is concerned, all it needs to know is that this database manager has these current methods and somehow it implements it. But the important thing is that it returns what you're expecting. If you're curious to see how exactly the implementation is done, I'm going to be leaving the GitHub link on the description of this video. So if you're curious to see how exactly I can get all of these things done with the SQLite 3 database, you can go ahead and check that. But one cool thing that I used for this project in specific is that was the first time that I was actually using AI tools to actually implement those methods, right? So I simply created the interface and I just asked a AI tool to implement a certain method. Given what I know as the inputs to be and given what I want to return, I asked the AI tool to write a method for me that implemented it that certain way. And that saved me a lot of time because all the implementation details, the AI tool did it. All I was worried about was the interface and what things I needed to get done for my application to work. And so I think that's also interesting. I mean, that's probably how the trade of software development is going into with all these AI tools, where you're almost acting as an architect, or you're acting almost as defining the interfaces between the components, how they interact. But the actual implementation, the algorithm of your program, you can let an AI do, and it's probably going to be more efficient, faster, and it's probably going to also find things that you probably missed at first and maybe cause some bugs, right? So that made my development of this thing much, much faster because I was only focusing on the interfaces and not on the implementation themselves. But anyways, now here I showed you the database. We have here the interface that I also showed. Now the only thing left is our REST server. I'm gonna open here our Flask server. We're using Flask, and we have a class here called Flask server. And we pretty much, we just instantiate here this Flask object. We see here that we pass in the constructor a database manager, and that's what I told you about, that we only care about the interface, right? So the Flask server, he doesn't really care exactly what it's the exact object it's getting as long as it implements the interface. It doesn't care if it's a SQLite 3 database or any other kind of database. As long as this database implements this interface, then it accepts it because it knows it can call the methods that it needs, right? And so here we have our app, we have our database that is passed as a parameter, and then we called here this setup routes. That's just gonna say, at this endpoint, you can call it a GET or a POST request, so we can have our web server running and ready to receive GET requests and POST requests to actually, update the client user interface. And so if we look here at the setup routes, the endpoint is just gonna be the root, right? So we're gonna go to the IP and the port, and that's just gonna load our web page. So if we use the get method on the root of our website, we're gonna here call this get activity streaks from our database. I told you this is just gonna give you a dictionary of all of your activities and the current most recent streak that you have for each activity. And then you're gonna be passing that as a context to your HTML page that you're actually just displaying to the user. And by context, I mean that you can send a dictionary to your UI.html, that's your web page, and the contents of that dictionary you can actually embed in your HTML page. So you can actually make it dynamic. So depending on which values you're getting from your database, you can display that on your HTML page. So let's quickly take a look there. I mean, as I told you, we're getting a dictionary here of all the streaks. And if you open here templates, we have our HTML page over here. And right here, we have a HTML page. It has some CSS to make it look nice. It also has some JavaScript here to handle the post and get requests. And in our HTML part, that's just very simple. We have a form with a submit button. And here is where we use that context, where we're given streaks. That's a dictionary, right? And we're getting the items of this dictionary. And then for each element in our dictionary, we're actually putting here a input field. That's gonna be a checkbox, so you can click on it, and a label, just to tell you, the activity name and also the most recent streak, how long your recent streak is. And we have a for here, so we actually use a for loop in a HTML page, so we can actually look at all of the activities. And here we have our button, our submit button, and the JavaScript is going to be looking into this button over here, and whenever it's pressed, then it's going to get all of the elements in your form and send that as a post to your web server that's running in Flask, right? And so for example here, whenever we click our submit button, our form data, we have here, for example, the new activity. We're gonna get the new activity from our HTML page, and we're gonna append that to our dictionary. The same thing with the checkboxes. So we're gonna get the current activity name and whether it was clicked or not. We're gonna put all that together into a dictionary and send that as a JSON back to our Flask application. And again, I'm not gonna bore you with all the implementation details here. You can look into this HTML code better if you want. I'm gonna be leaving the link in the description, but I just wanted to show you how we can actually send this context, the contents of this dictionary, to our HTML page here and actually display that in a dynamic form. But I mean, that's pretty much it, right? Here we just get the website, and here the post, that's when we're receiving posts from the client with the new information about each activity, whether the checkboxes are checked or not. And in the case now, right, we get the new data. We're gonna then here have the new activity in case the person wrote a new activity that they want, and the current status of the checkboxes, either checked or not. If the user gave us a new activity, we're gonna be adding a streak in our database. That's gonna be the new activity name. And by default, we're gonna be setting that to false. And for each activity that's already existent, we're just interested to see if the user clicked the checkbox or not. So we're gonna be adding the streak there with the activity name and whether it was checked or not. And our implementation, right, our database implementation is gonna add stuff to our database and automatically keep calculating the most recent streak. But that's pretty much all I have for today's video. I just wanted to show you this new solution that I had so I can keep counting my streaks, so I can keep forming these new habits. And if you like this, you can look into the code yourself and maybe even use it for your own habits, to form new habits. But I just wanted to share you this solution here that I did in Python. And if you stay to the end, thanks very much, and I see you next time.